It is a pleasure to be here, even though in the form of an acousmatic voice and with a cheesy video, celebrating Simon Frith. I would like to thank the organizing committee and particularly Matt Brennan for making this possible. For any question, note, correction, info or insult, please write me. As the famous aphorism, writing about music is like dancing about architecture suggests, the task of music criticism is quite a fascinating oxymoron, to translate music into words. The more difficult it looks, the more crucial it becomes. The more music seems to be abstract, and the more it seems to not make sense, the more it needs to be interpreted in order to be understood. Music criticism stands as a challenge for its practitioners, as it requires the balancing of different skills, always oscillating between extreme poles: music, the object to which criticism alludes, and writing, the means it uses, subjectivity explicitly displayed and objectivity implicitly claimed, information, description, judgment, and transfiguration. Where does the one end and the other begin? Journalism, aesthetics, musical analysis, and narrative. Any act of music criticism has a certain percentage of all these elements. In order to better understand this complex system, I decided to concentrate on a borderline phenomenon, trusting its heuristic value. The particular marginality and paradoxicality of these texts would have assured their features to be paroxysmally emphasized, easier to be recognized and studied. This contribution proposes a quick overview of the amusing, peculiar practice within rock journalism of writing about and properly reviewing records that do not exist, that are imaginary. A practice I have labeled euphonic criticism, a form of music criticism with no actual object to deal with neither sounds nor music to criticize, and potential discography, a consciously imperfect calque of littérature potentielle. I've set myself two basic aims. The first one is strictly informative and referential. I wanted to show this practice existed and exists, reporting a series of case studies, demonstrating that, even if it is obviously a niche phenomenon, it is much more diffused in rock journalism and in rock fandom than one might expect. The second aim is interpretative and argumentative. I built up a typology of common features and relevant differences in order to find a justification of each and every case. On the one hand, underlining the specific value of the different cases, which are only seemingly homologues, but in fact are very different in respect to intentions, context, style, and reception. They can be hoaxes, parodies, dream records, plays with the reader, etc. On the other hand, showing how this practice represents a form of music criticism in every respect, and more properly a form of meta-criticism. All these reviews increase in one way or another our knowledge of the musical fact, and are more or less explicitly a form of self-reflection on music criticism itself. Reviews of imaginary records seem to stand as an extreme form of so-called poetical criticism, opposed to so-called analytical criticism, which is closer to musicological analysis, exaggerating so much the features of music criticism as a subjective and transfigurative form of writing to go beyond simple music journalism. Grail Marcus, one of the first professional rock journalists and one of the most accredited, published in Rolling Stone issue 44, October 69, under the assumed name of T.M. Christian, a wink to Terry Saunton's The Magic Christian comic novel, the review of the Masked Marauders homonymous album, that is Bob Dylan, Mick Jagger, John Lennon, Paul McCartney and George Harrison, produced by Al Cooper, jamming together on old and contemporary classics. Even if the tone of the article was clearly exaggerated and parodistic, and despite the Daniel published by Rolling Stone co-founder Ralph J. Gleason in his column for the San Francisco Chronicle, fans started a true phantom treasure hunt in the record stores. Marcus actually wanted to ridicule the Super Sessions, started with Blomfield Cooper and Steele's Super Session in 1968, and the bootlegs, started that very same year with Bob Dylan's Great White Wonder. Amazed by this incredible misunderstanding, Marcus convinced Warner Bros. Record Company to produce an ambiguous LP, played by simple studio sessionmen, the Clean Linus and Good Linus Skiffle Band, featuring the same title, a very similar cover artwork, and some of the same songs, like I Can Get Nonuki, written by Marcus himself as a perfect Rolling Stone pastiche, mentioned in the review. This real and still fake record spent 12 weeks on the Billboard charts, peaking at 114, and it sold more than 100,000 copies in the US. After the hoax was revealed, rock journalist Robert Christgau, another historical name in rock journalism, sarcastically named it Album of the Year 1969. Lester Bangs, the most celebrated rock writer ever, published in Cream, Volume 3, Number 3, June 71, a long article written in the form of a dialogue between an all-black man and a bunch of white children, and unrealistically set in the future, in which he talked about Count Five's post-psychotic reaction career. They would have published 4 follow-up records entitled Carburetor Down, Cartesian Jet Stream, Ancient Lace and Wrought Iron Railings, Snowflakes Falling on the International Decline, in which they would have deviated from their original derivative garage rock style into a baroque form of free syncretic experimentation. The article was a clear divertissement, full of other fictional references, but also a manifesto, in which Banks stated his noise aesthetics against the dominant soft rock stanzas of the early 70s, epitomized by musicians such as James Taylor. Riccardo Bertoncelli, the enfant prodige of Italian rock journalism, inspired by Marcus' affair, published in the summer 72 issue of his self-published fanzine Freak the review of Smiles of Heaven, a collection of Jimi Hendrix jam sessions with other psychedelic stars such as Jerry Garcia. The review was intended as a personal joke to Paolo Caru, a well-known record seller and importer, who didn't fall for it, while lots of readers did, fascinated by the idea of eventually getting on record a bit of the magical depicted Hendrix Lost Sessions. Bertoncelli perfected the joke in Gong issue 11, November 75, reviewing Red Woods, the long-awaited by fans Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young's Deja Vu follow-up. The record was described as a definitive classic of the West Coast sound, and great care was devoted to the artwork of the fictional album, with a perfectly fitting atmospheric cover designed by Mario Convertino. The hoax was so successful that the Italian affiliated record company had to publish an official bulletin to state that the record did not exist at all. In the Italian rock and underground press of the mid-70s, in a cultural climate usually well disposed to situationist actions, other examples of fake reviews are reported. The most prominent case is perhaps the one of the countercultural magazine Renudo, Naked King, wherein the playful and parodistic purpose was explicitly displayed, as it was claimed that, among these reviews, there is one of a record that does not exist. Who will guess the imaginary review will receive the record as a gift. Maurizio Bianchini published in his column Platea, Stalls, in Il Mucchio Selvaggio, The Wild Bunch, issues 86 and 87 from March and April 1985, 8 reviews which were declared parodies of the linguistic and stylistic tics of as many Italian rock journalists. Their names were mangled. For example, the aforementioned Paolo Caru became Paolo Ragù, with a wink to the typical Italian pasta meat sauce called ragù. On the one hand, the reviewed albums were parodies of truly existing rock artists, such as Frank Zappa, The Byrds, Edoardo Bennato, The Wham, always under mangled names. For example, Frank Zappa became Frank Mazza, with a reference to the sexually connoted lyrics of the musician, as Mazza is a metaphorical appellative for penis in Italian. On the other hand, they were stereotyped, typical imaginary artists, such as the Roaring Hellbellies for garage rock, the Devilish Teachers for heavy metal, 8,000 miles high for the neo-psychedelia scene. Massimo Cotto, drawing inspiration from Bertoncelli's 1975 affair, published in Il Mucchio Selvaggio 100, May 86, the review of Songs to Orphans, the long-awaited first live album by blue-collar rock star Bruce Springsteen. The triple vinyl was described with a bit of ironic allusions as the epic, quintessential epitome must-have for every Boss fan. As with Bertoncelli's, the joke perfectly succeeded. Moreover, just a few months later, in November 86, the long-rumored first live album by Springsteen, Live 1975-85, was eventually published as a quintuple vinyl, and it was actually very close to the one imagined by Cotto. Vittore Baroni has written lots of potential discography examples throughout his music writing career, planned to be little situationist experiments. For instance, in his column Outsider in Rumore Noise issues 174-75 from the summer of 2006, he inserted invented facts in an article that portrayed the actually existing mysterious Dutch noise band called Masonic Youth. In 2005, he had written a review of an imaginary album, Riserva di Caccia, Game Reserve, by an imaginary animalist punk band, Polpetta e I Cani Avvelenati, Meatball and the Poison Dogs. Dionisio Capuano has written of imaginary albums, all made by truly existing artists, in his column Mission It's Possible, from Blow Up issue 81, February 2005, to issue 163, December 2011. This is the only found example of continual potential discography. I have analyzed 36 articles, from the first one to the one published on issue 119, April 2008, and roughly studied 3 of them, which were defined by the author himself as the most representative and successful ones. Remain Lights, with a wink to Talking Heads' Remaining Light, is the third Bob Dylan's rebirth due to producer Daniel Lanois, after Oh Mercy and Time Out of Mind, in a new wave sound-oriented key. Hypothetical Spiral Jazz Club Reconstructing Buddy is a homage to the mysterious jazzman Buddy Bolden, the so-called inventor of improvisation, whose music was never fixed on record, by a very heterogeneous crew led by sound artists Mark Wostel, Brian Morley and John Duncan. The Buddy EP, Spears Sings Manson, is Lolita pop star Britney Spears, produced by Nine Inch Nails' Deus Ex Machina Trent Reznor, covering 4 songs by iconic criminal Charlie Manson in a dance kitsch techno mixture. Capuano's reviews are the most complex and interesting among all the reported potential discography cases. At the same time, they are the most critical, metacritical and narrative ones. He has been building not only a rigorous, but at the same time cerebrally playful, speech about absolutely possible music and possible records. In these terms, it is almost a what-if project, giving a precise perspective on the artist's career, but also a true narrative in which he has given us his dark pessimism-soaked, even apocalyptic, point of view on contemporary music, art and society. A society in which John Duncan's extreme performance Blind Date marks the pillars of Hercules of artistic creation, and therefore in which Mission It's Possible itself stands in a paradoxical, self-denying escapism as the only possible residual form of music criticism. In other words, when music manages to kill itself, it is possible to make it out of musical corpses only. Thanks to 2 of the most accredited English music writers' testimonies, those of Simon Reynolds with the imaginary band William Wilson, Wilson Sisters, created for his fanzine Monitor back in 1986, and Paul Morley with his autobiographical reflections in the essay Words and Music, 2003, it is possible to understand that creating imaginary artists and writing about imaginary records is a widespread practice in rock fandom. For instance, I found some threads from Il Mucchio Selvaggio web forum from November 2006, which show lots of revealing affinities with Capuano's case, some of the same artists involved and with a similar treatment. Finally, it is possible not only to write a review of an imaginary album, but also an imaginary review of a truly existing album. To write the review of an album you haven't listened to. It is the other side of the coin of potential discography as we've seen it, another form of controversy against the rock establishment and business, another kind of situationist action. The most famous case does not deal with the record, but with a book. The review rock writer Richard Meltzer, another historical name in rock journalism, wrote for Rolling Stone magazine about Thomas Pynchon's postmodern milestone novel Gravity's Rainbow, back in 1973. The review portrayed a novel which was completely different, but no one seemed to notice it. Therefore, Meltzer inferred that no one had actually read the novel, or at least had understood it. All the analyzed cases of potential discography seem to share the implied idea that it is actually impossible to imagine a genre of music that is radically new, a new kind of music, a music that has never been heard before, even when talking about imaginary records and imaginary artists. Those who get near to it seem to be Banks, with his delirious Count 5 musical evolution, and Reynolds, with his foretelling of an unpredictable electronic glam revival. Capuano builds up a rigorous combinatory game and a digging among rubbish, Frankenstein-like patchwork, a chimera music. The others have dealt with perfectly existing kinds of music, and even with perfectly existing single pieces of music, Cotto and Springsteen case, confirming the importance of the record as a phonographical physical support. In such cases as this, it is the record and not the music within it that is imagined. The first distinction which is useful to make in order to build up a typology of the cases is between those which are hoaxes and those which are plays with the reader. Marcus' case became a hoax unintentionally, as it was intended by the author as a clear play. Baroni and Reynolds seem to put the stress on a kind of complicity with the reader, even if they still keep the form of a hoax. We have also to distinguish between imaginary records by truly existing artists and imaginary records by imaginary artists. All of them make the most of a musical world that in itself is easy to manipulate and make fantastic. The case of Buddy Bolden is emblematic of the music mythology, as it is possible to see with incredibly long list of fictional but also existing groups and artists within popular music. An interesting case in this perspective is the one of the imaginary guitarist Leon Country, created by Marco Drago and Gaetano Cappa for Remix, a 2002 playfully situationist radio broadcast produced by their creative factory Istituto Barlumen. It was a simple pretext to tell a possible, alternative and secret history of blues, jazz and rock music. This poetical, mythological conception of music criticism was and it is currently embraced, even out of proper potential discography examples, by Banks, Bertoncelli, Baroni and Capuano. All the cases have a prominent intertextual nature, marked by a network of names, titles, references, quotations, etc., presupposing a reader with a field-specific knowledge. They all offer forms of interpretation of musical facts, that is the basic feature of what we can define music criticism, and actually succeed in telling us something about real music by using an imaginary one. Potential discography stands as an unorthodox kind of music criticism, an extreme kind of so-called poetical one, overemphasizing its features as a subjective, transfigurative form of writing. It even creates by itself the music to criticize. All the cases represent sorts of exercises on typicalness in rock music, typicalness in played rock, We deal with records that are the physical incarnation of an ideal of music, with dream albums, stereotype or classic albums and artists. Typicalness in written rock, with ironic allusions to the language of criticism, to controversies, parodies, up to proper self-reflexive speeches. Writing about imaginary albums is intimately a metacritical practice, which leads to build up a real exercise of style, both in writing and in musical ideology. Its ideal readers are, first of all, critics themselves. Writing about imaginary records implies an idea of music criticism as a proper form of writing, almost an autonomous literary genre, and therefore, like literature itself, an idea of music as a possible word, or better, as a word of possibilities. These reviews and these imaginary records are set in the very same microcosm where reality and imagination, actual and possible, true and false, truth and lie overlap, and within which we can find Dr. Faustus, Jorge Luis Borges' fictional books and authors, John Cage's imaginative and to-be-imagined music, bastard pop and mashup music, Orson Welles' meditation on art as a mystification, mockumentaries. Such a microcosm of heterogeneous elements as this seems to follow one main rule: reality is just one of the many possibilities. If Borges said, it suffices that a book be possible for it to exist, only the impossible is excluded, the same thing seems to happen with music and records. Thank you very much for your kind attention. For any question, note, correction, info, or insult, please write me. Thank you very much.